I wanted to make a dress inspired by this Zimmerman dress and this Selkie bodice. So let's see how I do it. Hello makers, and welcome to Sheer Stitchery. I'm Catherine Harris, and this is your spot for all things sewing and creative. So hit that subscribe button down below. This week, I wanted to share with you my inspiration for a summer dress. I wanted to create a dress to wear to my daughter's grade 12 graduation, and I was looking at this fabric from Mind the Maker, and I was inspired. So a lot of times, people either have kind of two categories. The first category is people that find a pattern and then search for the fabric to go with the pattern. And then there are the people that find the fabric and then search for a pattern to go with the fabric. I tend to be the latter. I get inspired by fabrics and textures and prints. And I went to Former Ladder Fabrics. I will link them down below. They are a local Edmonton company that is specializing in garment fabrics, and they have a really great selection and is in a very cool building. They had just started up, and I am so lucky to have found them, and they carried some Mind the Maker fabric, and I fell in love with this print that I am wearing. These really large, bold navy polka dots and this neutral creamy blush pink. Now, this fabric came in a couple of different colorways, but this colorway just spoke to me, and I knew that this is what needed to be the dress for my daughter's graduation. So my daughter's graduation dress, I have already shared a couple of shorts with you on this, and I will share the full video of me making this up for the Shea gown, and I will turn that into a pattern for you so that you guys can download it. I just have to grade it to all of the different sizes. So she was inspired by the live action Cinderella, and she wanted to include a Selkie bodice style for her dress. So we kind of mashed that up and created this beautiful ball gown. Now, I had decided to take and pay homage to the fact that she had that Selkie inspired bodice, but I wanted to do something that was more befitting to what my style is and what I wanted. And so I've really liked this ballerina dress from Zimmerman. It comes in a couple of different colors. They've released it for a while now, and I thought that I could mash up these two patterns and kind of get a good inspiration on that. So obviously I'm not going to copy them because that's not my style, but I wanted to take some elements from it. So one of the elements that I took from the Selkie style, and more so from the Shea gown, because of course this is her grad, and I wanted to have some parallels to the two garments that I made, especially because it is something that holds emotional value to both her and I, is the fact that I decided to create this under bust line within the pattern, and that is very similar on both of these patterns. Now on the Zimmerman dress, it does have this V neckline. So I thought that I would steal that, well, not steal, but use that for this pattern. Now I wanted to create a bit of gathers along this underbust to help with some of that fullness within that cup shape. And then of course, the thing that I needed was some beautiful statement sleeves. And lo and behold, I used the exact same pattern piece that I drafted for Shea's graduation gown as I did for these sleeves. And so they look very different with the different layers. She had a number of different tulle layers as well as a silky satin in there. And this is just a single layer of a viscose twill. And I think that it is beautiful. They're not the exact same as what the Zimmerman one was, but that's not what I wanted. I wanted to have that fullness gathered within the sleeve cap, as well as the elasticized bottom band, and these just really hit the spot on that. Now I decided to, on the back of the dress, kind of cut off and have like a very high, almost right at my underbust line, going along the back of the dress for a seam line. And then I wanted my skirt to flare out. I didn't want it to be very, very fitted along the center waistline. I wanted to have a nice subtle curve to give me some of that feminine shape, but I wanted it to be loose and billowy and just kind of like that easy breezy, almost like 1960s vibes, because we all know I love all things vintage. So I decided to do that for the skirt. Now I cut it out, I drafted it, and I didn't do up a muslin because that's the way I roll. And in fact, I made this with less than 24 hours before my daughter's graduation, because I literally finished her dress basically a little over a day before her graduation. So I was stitching this up the night before her graduation and drafting the pattern that morning. So I had no time to do up a muslin for a fit check. And I think it turned out pretty well. The one thing is, it is a little bit short. And it's gorgeous and I absolutely love it. But as a mom of a graduating student, I probably would have increased the length maybe a couple of inches, just to give a little bit more modesty. That being said, I absolutely love how flirty it is, and really at that length, it really reminds me of the 1960s. So I stitched it up, and I wanted to take you through the process on how I drafted it and stitched this up. Bear in mind, I am going to be turning this into a pattern, and I have already, since going to her graduation and filming this, I have already made some adjustments to this pattern, which will be translated on the final version. But in case you wanted to make this on your own, I will walk you through how you do that, just going off of a basic sloper that you have in your size. And if you want to know how to draft your very own sloper, do let me know in the comments down below. I am happy to do a video on that, both on digital drafting or just drafting on paper. So let's get into it. So to start, we're going to draft the front bodice of the pattern. So grab the woven sloper that you like to use. And if you want to see how to do a sloper yourself, do let me know in the comments down below. I am just marking where my bust line is, where that apex of my bust is, with these red lines. And then I am just freehanding where I would like it to come. I want it to sit under my bust line. So I am just going to drag a curved line. If you are drafting this on paper with your sloper, you can use a French curve to help you get that really nice curve in there. And then right here, I have just marked out how I want to narrow the shoulder line just slightly along that neck edge. And then I am going to make a deep V cut coming down to that bust point. So if you are drafting in Illustrator, you are going to hit C or the cut tool to cut these and then delete those lines. If it's on paper, it's as easy as just not cutting that out when you finish the pattern here. So I have that all in place, and I've removed that neckline to create that V neck right here. And so the red lines here are my guidelines and what you would be drawing lightly in pencil if you are drafting. So you can notice here when I do the cuts, sometimes it doesn't always connect. I am just hitting average and then join to join these, because when we add the seam allowances on later, if you haven't joined them, you are going to get two sets of lines, one on the inside and one on the outside. So you want to make sure that everything is connected. Also, if you are planning on grading your patterns, if they aren't joined, you're going to have a heck of a time. So right here, I am just removing this and I am rounding out that point just ever so slightly and just removing this. You can see these are 2 points that are not joined. I'm just going in here and joining them. I've zoomed in so that you can see where those points end and how they aren't joined together. So I'm just going to go ahead and cut them and join them in place. Now for the lower portion here, the next thing we need to do is go ahead and remove any of those guidelines, because we want to cut this in two. We want this to be two separate pieces. So if you're on a paper pattern, just get out your rotary cutter and snip that out and cut these in two. So what I'm doing is extending the line just slightly past, because in Illustrator, we can use the divide tool. So I am going to highlight this. So I'm going in, I'm just double checking that I have my side seams are going to be the same length. So you can see they are not, which I suspected. So the next thing I need to do is just adjust this guideline ever so slightly so that it comes down to the point where we have these side seams together. Now you can see there's a little bit of a wonky dip here. We are going to fix that, so don't you worry about that. So I am just deleting the rest of that, joining it, and then I'm going to smooth it out. Now, if you're doing this with a pencil and paper, it is nicely done to just trace over those lines. A little bit more fiddly when you're working digitally, but hey, I'm saving some trees here. And then I'm going to highlight everything, and then I'm going to click the divide tool, which divides these pattern pieces up. Now I've placed the cut on a fold on this pattern piece, so I don't forget that I've cut that on the fold. That being said, this bodice piece doesn't need to be cut on the fold here because we have that V neckline. Now I'm going to divide it once more, and I just randomly chose a spot about halfway on the arm side. And I'm using this to open up the pattern piece. I'm dividing it, and then I am going to go in and rotate it. So I'm hitting that rotate tool in the corner. So I'm just rotating on the edge. If you're doing this on pattern, you are going to cut into it just to the point until it hits that edge, and then you can rotate it and put some paper underneath and just tape it in place, and then go ahead and redraw your new bodice piece, which I have right here. We can delete that other piece, and this is the bodice piece. I just put gather the bottom so that I know when I am doing it that I need to gather here. And I always like to label my pattern pieces so that I know what is what and if I'm making any adjustments. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to match up these shoulder seams along the bodice back. Because I had reduced that neckline slightly, I'm just going to drag that in and shorten that neckline just a little bit right here. So you can see that I'm just using the move tool to move that neckline out, and I'm going to bring it down. Now you want to make sure that the neckline comes in at a 90 degree along with that center back, or you're going to have some wonkiness going on. Now for the back bodice. So with the back bodice here, I am just drawing a couple of guidelines here because I want to just make sure I've got everything set as I want it. So I am just going to find where that dart is. And I'm just drawing some guidelines. I should have had these in red for you, but I was going quickly. And there we go. Let's pop them into red so that we know they are guidelines, just so I know where everything is. So right here, I am going to reduce the length right here, because this is the amount that I reduced the length on the other side. So I am just looking at my guideline here, and I want to place that guideline right like so. And we are going to do the exact same thing along the top. So you can see I've got the top and the bottom for those guidelines, and then I'm going to drag and pull it in. And then you can see that I have this going on here. Now this is just coming in. Now I want to make sure my side seams are the same. So I've brought in my new front piece, and I am going to rotate that so that it matches up. And then now I can see this is exactly where I need to cut it along the back line, which happens to be that same as that guideline. So if you were measuring on paper, you can just walk your pattern across there, or you can use those guidelines like I showed you in that earlier step. Both are right. I like to use this because I'm drawing a line and then I'm going in and dividing it. So you can see I've got two pieces, a top and a bottom. I'm going to drag the bottom and put them over here. We are going to use that later, so do not throw those pieces away. Those get added to the bottom of the skirt. Let's focus on this back bodice piece here. So I am just going to add in all of my details, and basically the back bodice piece is all complete. Now for the skirt front. So remember that skirt piece we have here. So we're going to grab our skirt sloper, which is just a standard sloper, like a pencil skirt. So it's got absolutely no flare. We are going to go and run a line right down the center, down the dart, and divide that. So if you're on paper, just cut it in half. And then remember that under piece on the bodice that we had left over that I said, let's make sure we put this on the fold so we don't forget. Yep, that's the piece that we need. So with this, I am just lining this up, and you want to make sure it is parallel to that center front seam on the skirt. And then I am drawing a line here to make sure it is indeed parallel. And then I'm lining it up to the edge of that skirt, and then I'm going to divide this piece again. So now we have a center front and a side front piece. And then I'm going to click Unite here in Illustrator to unite these two shapes. And if you are working on paper, you are just going to tape them together. So you can see that this one needs to be rotated. So I am rotating it. And if you're using the Unite tool, you have to make sure that it is overlapping just slightly. So I'm just zooming in here, and you can see that I'm making sure that it is overlapping just slightly on here. Otherwise, it will not work for the Unite. So now we have these two pieces, as well as the newly formed top that is going to attach to that new bodice that we had created. So I have placed them together, and then I'm clicking rotate. If you're doing this on paper, obviously you're just going to tape that top little piece where they're connecting, and then you're going to rotate it out to get the flare that you want. So I am just going in here and I am sketching this out. I have locked the selection underneath so that I don't accidentally select anything. And then I'm going to find that center. I am going to bring it down, and then I am going to create a nice gentle curve for that circle skirt along the bottom hemline. And then of course, this is cut on the fold, so I want to make sure I put that back. And I'm just rotating it so the grain line is straight, and then adding in everything that I need so that I know exactly what this piece is for. And then you can see that we have everything all set. I'm actually going to come in and create some notches here. So I like to put my notches in here so that I can figure out exactly where they should and shouldn't line up. I'm doing notches along the side seam as well. That way I can match up the front and the back with my sewing pattern as well. So I've just got this here and placing it in place. Now with this, I have two options with my Tallulah dress that I wanted to do. One is the cut on the fold center front, and one is where we actually have a slit going up the front in a longer version. So this is the longer version, but you can choose what you want. Now for the skirt back. Remember those two pieces that I said don't throw away? Well, those are going to go along the skirt back. So grab your sloper skirt back and just place it in here, and then line up those two pieces to the edges of that skirt sloper. So you can see that I am just dragging this up out of the way, and we're going to do the same thing that we did with the other skirt. We're going to draw a straight line right through the center of that dart. So I made sure it's right in the center, cut them apart. So I'm using the divide tool if you're using Illustrator. And then I am going to unite these pattern pieces. So I'm just going in and uniting them. And so you can see that you've got a little wonky pieces when you do unite them, just a bit, but you don't need to worry because we're going to redraw this. Go up to the top, and then we're going to rotate because of course we want our skirt to flare out. Now, this is going to give you a more roomy feel along the waistline, which is what I am going for. If you want it to be a little tighter on the waistline, you would rotate in a little different area. That being said, this is how I'm creating this pattern. Then I'm going to lock my selection, and I'm going to retrace over everything, smoothing out those lines, and then going and creating a nice gentle curve going upwards. And this is our skirt back piece. I'm just going to take this, make sure my green line is in, and then of course we need to go ahead and label that. So the next thing that I like to do is just make sure everything matches up along these sides. So I've grabbed the skirt front and I'm matching them at that waist seam, and then I'm going to rotate or walk my pattern along the side here. And so I am grabbing the notch from my pattern annotations, and I am going to match up that notch that we created earlier on the center front, and I am going to group it with that back piece. If you're doing this on paper, you just need to draw it in. You don't have to worry about grouping it. In Illustrator, if you do not group it, when you go and rotate it and move that pattern piece, it is not going to move with the rest of the pattern. So you do want to make sure that you are grouping it to the right pattern piece. And then I'm just walking it, going all the way down, making sure everything lines up perfectly, which mine does. And then I'm just dragging it down just slightly and adjusting this curve because I noticed that it was coming in at a bit of a dip and I didn't have that nice seam going on that circle. So you just want to straighten that up a little bit. You can do that in pencil if you're working with paper as well. Don't forget to label this new pattern piece and get everything all set the way you need to. So next I am using the move tool to move this circle down, and this is just for the length of my zipper so that I know where to stop for my zipper, but you can measure whatever length of zipper you have and create your notches based on that. And so right here you can see we've got our skirt front and back and bodice front and back, and now for the sleeves. So this is what I did with my sleeve sloper. So it's a regular sleeve sloper that is done in woven, and I have created a line of the length that I want my sleeve to end at. And then I am just creating another parallel line so that I can divide it at that length. So I'm just going to delete my bottom half because I don't need that anymore because I want a shorter sleeve. And then I am going to go in and I just basically drew a bunch of parallel lines, and then I am going to divide that. So now they're all separate pieces, and I am using my move tool. So Control-Shift-M, and then using just moving them out however many inches that you want. And really, it's up to you how much you are going to be moving those out, depending on how puffy you want your sleeve to be. And then next, I am just drawing a parallel line just to make sure everything is all even here. And you can also use this by creating a point, bringing it up to the top, and now we are going to create that curve. So then you just drag it out so it goes above where you have all of those pieces that you had. Now, if you're doing this on paper, it's as easy as just drawing and freehanding that curve. Use a French curve if you need to, if you don't trust your curve lines. And then I am just dragging the legs of that curve just to match, and then I'm creating a new bottom and joining all of these lines. If you're doing this with paper and a pen, you don't need to worry about joining. But if you're in Illustrator, go ahead and add in those notches, double notch for the back, because the sleeve that I was using for my sloper did have a different front and back to it. And then I am grouping that. Then I'm going in and deleting that inner piece, adding in my grain lines, as well as labeling my pattern piece that it is the sleeve and what I need to cut out of it. And now we just need to add our seam allowances. So I love Illustrator because all you have to do is go down into adjusting the object and adding in an offset line. So you want to offset that object by whatever your seam allowance is. In this instance, I used 3/8 of an inch. When you do it on a dart, it kind of looks a little wonky. Go ahead and delete that, draw your line in. I usually leave mine like this for my patterns, but if I am going to be doing a pattern for sale, I will actually go ahead and draw that little notch just so that nobody cuts that out. So I'm just going to do that little triangle notch and join everything together, and then you can see that we have the seam allowances all set in place along here. So just make sure you go ahead and join it all, because if you go to grade this, you're going to have some trouble if it's not all joined together. And then I group everything. So going in, doing something like a pocket, super simple. All you have to do is have that offset line. Now, when we're doing something that is going to be on the fold, so this center front piece here is on the fold, I'm going to delete that side line, and then I'm going to drag up that seam allowance because it's on the fold. We don't need a seam allowance there. I'm going to change the line so it is a solid line. I'm using my cut tool to be able to differentiate between those two pieces, and then going ahead and putting that dashed line in. Now, if you're doing this on paper, super simple, just go around and you can use even like 2 pencils that are tied together with rubber bands to be able to go in and create that seam allowance. But just make sure that you're using consistent seam allowances. Now on something like the sleeve, I am going to create another offset line and deleting the rest except for the bottom because I want a double fold hem. So I need to have 3/8 of an inch doubled on each of that. So you can see I'm just adding that seam allowance in and joining it up. And there you have it. So we've got that drafted for you. The next thing to do is stitch it up. So I wanted to make sure that you stay tuned for part 2 where I'll actually be sewing this up. I didn't want to make too long of a video for you, and I will be releasing this later this week. So if you're watching this live, you only have a couple of days until I stitch this up. And if you're watching this a little bit later, well, head right on over to part 2.